Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast with Don Higgins. I'm Terry Peer, brought to you by Osseo Gear. It is the 1st of October. Opening season is already happened. Don's been hunting, but before we get rolling on the podcast, we got some just crazy off-the-wall topics that are going to be really interesting tonight. But last week we had to record a little bit early, and this hurricane and all this devastation had not happened at the time we recorded. But obviously when it uploaded, all of it was kind of public knowledge. And Don, we got a bunch of friends down in that area. We've been trying to check on people, but just such devastating news, and just wish everybody the best. It's horrible to hear about.
Yeah, it was crazy to see how there was even whole towns that got washed away. I forget where that one town was at, but then the interstate's getting washed away, and there was a lake that I seen. The whole surface of the lake was totally covered with debris from the floods, and you just got a feel for those people.
Yeah. We have a lot of friends down there. We were trying to check in, and I know there's a lot of people affected, and I know some people questioned in the comments something about the flood, and just, we recorded the day before all of that hit and before the news was out. So again, we wish everyone the best and prayers. Just so many people, just devastating news. So, keep them all in your prayers. I just got back from Tampa Bay. Even though there was a hurricane, I went down there for a couple of days for business. But we want to talk about you starting off your hunting season with already 3 animals dead, and one of them is not Zychaeus. But we also got some other interesting topics to talk about, and that is, I find the one most fascinating. I want to hear what you have to say, and that's the lack of rubs this year. And then also you got some stuff to talk about does chasing bucks. So I don't know which one you want to kick off first to start the show, but I really want to dive into what you've seen so far from the tree stand.
Well, I've had 3 hunts so far, and let's see. The first hunt, all I seen was a coyote, which I shot. The second hunt, I seen a button buck, and that was it. And then my third hunt, I seen quite a bit more. I shot a coyote early in that hunt, so I'm 2 for 2 on coyotes. Then I seen a group of 7 does and fawns came out of the switchgrass and was feeding in a real-world soybean plot. And then they moved over into a deadly dozen plot. And then there was a pretty good buck came out into those soybeans as well. Got some really good footage of him. But that group of does fed past me, and I ended up right before dark. I shot one of those does. I made it pretty clear that I want to shoot a bunch of does this year. And she happened to be in a spot where it was just perfect. And I made a great hit on her, hit her right in the heart. And that she only went about 60 yards. She never even went in the cover. She died out on the edge, and never even went in the cover at all, either switchgrass or wood. So that could not have happened any better. And drove the skid loader right to her and loaded her in the bucket, and away we went. So 3 arrows, 3 hunts, 3 arrows, 3 dead animals.
2 dead coyotes and 1 dead doe. And we've talked about you wanting to kill does this year just because of some numbers and what you've seen from observation, but that's exactly the scenario that you were looking for, is being able to shoot a doe and not tromp up your switchgrass or your bedding. If you were next to one of your rut stands or, close into that bedding where she was going that direction, you probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger on the release, would you?
No, in fact, the stand I hunted on the second hunt where I seen the button buck, I was just sitting there thinking that there's probably going to be a doe come by with another button buck. So there's going to be twin button bucks in this doe, and it's going to be at a stand I do not want to shoot. It'd be just my luck. But he was by himself. He fed on some acorns and in front of me for about 10 minutes, and then turned and went back the way he came. So Didn't have to worry about that. But I'm focusing. I'd like to get several does shot here in the early season if possible, and I'm kind of hunting those kind of stands. I'm not going to some of my better spots really, just to hopefully to get some doe shot.
Yeah. And you made a social media post with a picture of Zychaeus this week, and people were already pessimistic, saying that you'd already killed him. That's why you were sharing the picture.
Yeah.
But you have not seen him from a tree stand yet, as of tonight when we're recording, have you?
I have not. No, I posted that. We're trying to get the Chasing Giants TV social media up so that we can post those videos each day and get more engagement and get more people seeing those. And it's kind of a slow process, but that's what I was doing, was trying to direct people to that. And it worked to some degree. I mean, we got a lot of new followers. I checked the numbers right before I posted, and then I checked them again about 24 hours later. And we got about 300 new followers, so it wasn't too bad. But folks, if you're listening and you're not already, if you are on social media, you need to follow Chasing Giants TV. Got some real good videos coming at you, and we're making them daily, so be worth your time.
And there's something for everybody. It's whether we're talking about small properties, public properties, it's all different types, and there's something for everybody. Now, if you go back, we last week we talked a little bit about Zychaeus, and you talked about why you had named him Zychaeus. But on Friday, 2 days ago from when this podcast releases, you actually did about an 8-minute video with pictures, trail camera pictures of this buck for the last 2 years. So if you haven't seen that, go back to YouTube on Friday, October 4th. And there'll be a video upload there. It's about 8 minutes, 7-8 minutes, I believe. You talk a little bit about the history of the buck that you had, show even some video and trail camera footage, and even give an update about Andrea, and your wife's even been sick. So talking a little bit about that as you were gearing up for, I think you filmed it the day before opening day to kind of go through that. So make sure you go back and check that out and learn about the history of this buck. I think people are going to find it really interesting. Some of those trail camera photos of Zychaeus as a 3-year-old. And I kept thinking when I saw those pictures about your analogy last week, when a 150-inch 3-year-old and a 125-inch 3-year-old comes out, Zychaeus is getting shot almost every single time, but passing on that deer at 3-year-old 150, 160-inch deer is giving you a chance at a 190 this year.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this video is there's 3 years of trail camera footage or photos, and there's 2 years of video footage of me passing that deer the last 2 seasons. So hopefully I'll get him shot this season, and if I do, then we'll produce a video on that. But this is kind of leading up to that. I mean, I saved some stuff for the hunt video when I get him killed, but this video is going to show some history of that buck, and I think it'll be interesting for folks to see what he looked like from 3 to 4 to 5.
Yep. So before we go to the Osseo segment, I know you're going to check trail cameras over the next couple days just to see what's going on. Has the crops been pulled out after all this rain? I'm sure we got wet and probably slowed the farmers down. What is the status of around you where the crops being pulled out?
Well, it was pretty slow at the beginning of the week. Just way too damp. Those soybeans got to be dry for the combine to be able to really, shell them out of that pod. And they started yesterday, but today every farmer in the area is in the field right now, every single one of them. And boy, the crops are coming out. There was 3 or 4 fields around my house that got totally harvested today, including the soybean field on my place. It was harvested today, so the crops are definitely coming out. Looking at the forecast, it looks like it's going to be dry for the next 10 days. So the farmers are going to be going at it hard, until it rains again.
Yeah, they'll be working around the clock, trying to get as much out before the next rain comes in. We did get some devastating news. I'm going to head up to Illinois this coming weekend and double check, but it looks like one of our farms got hit really hard with EHD. So I think I made a comment last week that I'd only seen a bunch of coyotes and fawns, and I got a hold of some of the neighbors this week, and it does look like that we got hit. They found a bunch of dead deer. So yeah, I mean, it's we talk about it. It's like, you pass on these deer and try to let them grow up, and they're wild. It's a wild game, just like you said with Zychaeus. He could be hit by a car, or EHD can hit him. It's the decision that you have to make when you're deciding what to do for the year, because you might not be guaranteed a chance at these critters.
Yeah, another hunter could kill Zychaeus, and I had people saying I'm crazy for putting the picture out, on social media, but the thing of it is, putting that picture out is not going to get that deer killed in my situation, because I think locals, they're not going to change their hunting pattern because of me. If they've got permission to hunt on a property, they're going to hunt it no matter what my cameras say. And I just don't see that having any effect whatsoever.
And if they do it legally and that deer's on their property, you just tip your hat to them. I mean, that's part of it. You gotta,
good for them.
You gotta be happy for them for chasing their dreams also. So,
right.
Well, I want to spend some time talking about this lack of rubs comment that you made to me when we come back from the osseous spot. So for everybody who's listening, start thinking about this and start thinking about comparing rubs to last year, because there's so many things that were different coming into this season. We talked about the early spring and early antler development. Then we had the drought, and it's just fascinating to me to put all these pieces together on how all of these things might be intertwined. So stay tuned after the osseous spot, and we'll be right back.
Osseo Gear has perfected one of the most innovative camo patterns on the market. The unique camo pattern designed to mimic the feather patterns of one of North America's greatest predators, the great horned owl. Combined with intuitive features, superior comfort, and ultra high quality fabrics, give bow hunters the ultimate advantage. Osseo has outfitted over 10,000 bow hunters across the country with over 1,000 5-star reviews. Visit asiogear.com to check it out for yourself. Use code CHASINGGIANTS for 15% off.
Well, Don, explain to me what you meant about the comment about the change in the number of rubs. I want to really hear what you're going to say here.
Well, I've just noticed this fall that I've been out every bit as much as I typically am, in September and early October. And yet I've seen very, very, very few rubs. In fact, I could probably count on one hand the number of rubs I've seen all fall. I've seen plenty of scrapes. I've seen way more scrapes than I have rubs, but I just have not seen the rubs that I typically do. And I don't know what that means, if it means anything at all, but it just kind of dawned on me about a week ago. And then I started really paying attention and actually looking for rubs, and I just haven't seen them. And I wanted to bring it up here because I'd like for other people to comment and see if they're seeing the same number of rubs they would typically see at this point in the season, or if they're like me and they just haven't seen the rubs that they typically do. And the other thing that really caught my attention this week was I checked a trail camera. Well, I checked several trail cameras actually, but I checked one in particular here on my farm, and I was, brought the card in and was going through the card, and I'm telling you, I think there was a doe in heat on my farm, and this would have been back in September, because there was 4 of the biggest bucks on my farm were chasing this doe in broad daylight. I mean, like 2 in the afternoon, back and forth. This doe was literally, it was just like the rut. And 4 of the biggest mature bucks on my farm were on that doe's tail. And I don't know how many pictures I got. I didn't have any really good pictures because they was running, it was a little bit blurry. But those 4 bucks were chasing that doe all over the place in front of that camera for 30 minutes or so before they went elsewhere. And I had never seen that. And, I got to thinking, I had those captive deer for about 20, 25 years, and I only had one doe one time come into heat in October. And I know I've heard some different theories of The old dominant doe, she comes in first in October and sets the stage for the rut or whatever. I think that's a bunch of garbage. But I only had one doe in all those years come into heat in October and never in September. And here, this doe, I'm almost certain she was in heat. She just had to be. The way those bucks were chasing her around in broad daylight, she almost had to be coming in heat.
I've never heard anything like it. I mean, I get when does come in late, January, even February, with a first year fawn or doe at that point, coming into cycle, but it's got to be rare if that's what it was coming in early.
Well, I mean, we're full 2 months early, so these fawns would be born about the late March, 1st of April, about 2 months ahead of normal, and they could have a hard time surviving that time of the year.
Right. Well, we'll see what happens. You never know. Let's talk a little bit about a good friend of ours, and we're not going to mention names of the lady or whatever, but a good friend of ours, Gene Burkholder. You got a little bit of a update, and we want to ask for prayers for that family as well. So why don't we do that right now?
Yeah, Gene Burkholder he owns a Midwest Farm and Pet along with his brother Lonnie there at Bremen, Indiana, and they're real world dealers, good friends of ours. Been involved with them in a number of things, and Gene's daughter has some health issues. I'm not at liberty to say exactly what it is at this point. I know she went to a specialist today for some tests and such. So haven't heard anything definitive back from Gene on that, but that 9-year-old girl up in Bremen, Indiana definitely needs everyone's prayers. So just ask for all the listeners to keep that little girl in your prayers.
Yep. All right. I got one more question to catch you off guard here before we go on to the listener submitted questions tonight. And I'm looking at my phone right now at the 15-day forecast. So at what point, if I'm looking at this let me change it to your hometown, not mine. That way we get a true comparison. We got on, let's see, this episode is going to drop on the 6th of October. On the 7th and 8th of October, we're going to have about a 20-degree temperature swing, and it's going to get down to 40 degrees. Then the highs and lows are going to be higher like normal again, and even get up into the lows in the 50s. Are you going to adjust your morning October hunt when you see a 1 day in there where the low goes from 60s to down to 42? Would you hunt that morning?
Nope, I won't.
I knew you were going to say that.
I was listening to some guy on a podcast. I don't know, it was just a short clip that was on social media, and this guy, and it kind of tickles me that these guys that have become experts, and they're still wet behind the ears. So this young pup was saying that it's crazy to not hunt October mornings, and he don't know who started that or why they started it or blah blah blah. I wish that I could be there interviewing these people, because my first question to that guy would have been, how many mature bucks have you killed on an October morning? And we got a question that kind of leads into this same response too, but everybody's got an opinion. Back that opinion up with some bucks on the ground, and then you could start talking. And that's the one thing that frustrates the heck out of me about the internet and social media, is that back in the day when I was a pup, you had to pay your dues and you work your way up. And today, anybody can have a podcast, anybody can have a web show, anybody can do anything, and everybody's got an opinion, but how many people can back up that opinion with bucks on the ground? And I don't mean one. Going out on an October morning and killing one buck is one thing. And I'm not talking late October during a cold front. I mean, if you're telling people they need to be hunting October mornings, let's see your bucks. Back up your mouth with some bucks on the ground.
Because, I mean, let's dive into that just a little bit. Unwrap it. I mean, I look at this and say, well, what are the disadvantages or what are the hurdles for hunting October mornings? Number one, most of the time a mature buck's already going to be back laid down before the sun comes up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But number two, the amount of places that you and I have together, I mean, think about all the different stand locations between you and I across all the states that you and I have. I only have one that I would even possibly consider a morning hunt that would be foolproof access, because so much of our access is over open ag. I'm worried about busting a whole field of deer that might be out there just getting to my stand in the mornings. I don't know. What else are we missing here?
Well, I've told the story before. I don't know if I've ever told it on this podcast, but I know I used to use an aerial photo, and I used to tell this story in the master class that I would have here on my farm. And I'd show the aerial photo of this property that I was hunting years ago when I still had a factory job. And it was I used to leave work right at daybreak, or leave home for work right at daybreak, and I'd drive to work, and a lot of times I'd take the scenic route a little bit, get to work at the last minute, right before starting time. But it was more important for me to spend a few minutes on those back roads, hopefully seeing a deer or something. And there was this one particular morning, it rained all night. It rained hard all night. And I come out of the house to get my truck to drive to work, and that rain is just stopping. I mean, it's just a real light drizzle. And by the time I got to work, it had stopped. And so I went into work that morning. The wind was out of the west. And I remember it because there's a flag that flew at where I was employed. And I just got in the habit of every time I went in or out of that building, I was looking at that flag to check wind direction. And that morning I walked into work, wind was out of the west. Well, I went out and I knew the wind direction was supposed to change. And I went to lunch and came out and went to lunch, and I checked the flag, and that wind it was supposed to switch out of the straight north, and it did. When I came out for lunch, it was northwest, working its way around to straight north. Well, that afternoon, so, I'm making plans as I'm at work, where am I going to hunt that evening? Because back in those days, I hunted every opportunity, and I would work the day shift in October so that I'd get off at 3:00 in the afternoon, and I could hunt every evening, which I did. And so I was thinking about, where am I going to hunt this evening with that north wind and all this? And I had a spot picked out, and it is a spot that I had seen some really good bucks and really good sign. This is back in the day before there was near as many bow hunters as there is today. But to get to this woodlot where I was hunting, I had to walk down this fence row for probably pushing a half a mile down this fence row. It was a good long walk. And then I had to loop around to come into that woodlot the right way. So I was walking from east to west with that north wind to my side, so a crosswind. But then before I got to the woodlot where I was going to hunt, I had to loop around and come in with that wind in my nose or in my face. So anyway, I'm walking down this fence row, and I come across this giant set of deer tracks. It was one deer by himself, and those tracks were fresh. And it rained the whole night before, so I knew that track had just been made that morning, right about daylight, give or take. And I knew that morning that the wind was out of the west. And so that north wind allowed me, and I knew that buck was headed right for that woodlot where I was going to hunt that afternoon. And he was headed right down that fence row with that west wind right in his nose. And I wanted to follow his tracks to see what he did, see if I could learn anything. And boy, did I ever. So he went down that fence row, and he would have hit like the it'd been the southeast corner of that fence row with that wind right in his nose. But before he got there, like 50 yards before he got to that woods, he turned and he went in the wide open field. He ran the downwind edge of that woods, and I followed it because I could do that without my scent blowing into the cover, and there's enough breeze and stuff to cover my noise. I thought it was way more important for me to learn what that buck did, because I knew it was a mature buck by the size of that track. And so that's when, you hear me talk about bucks running the downwind edge of bedding cover and then J-hooking into it. Once they've run the downwind edge and scent checked it all, then they J-hook back into it. And that's exactly what that buck did. That's the first time that the whole thing all come together for me. That day, I became a better deer hunter, and I didn't kill a deer that day, but seeing what that buck did, knowing that track had to have been made right there about daylight, I recognized that there was absolutely no place that I could have possibly been, no tree I could have been in, that deer would not have smelled me. He would have caught me no matter where I would have been sitting. And that right there was the day that I stopped hunting October mornings. And I had almost no success on October mornings anyway. And that pretty much just told me why. When those bucks are coming back at that time of the year, they're not taking chances. They are as wary as they're ever going to be. It's not like summer when they're in the bachelor group heading leisurely out to the alfalfa or soybean field every evening. It's not like that at all. Once they lose velvet, they become almost a different critter until the rut gets them fired up again. Then they start taking more chances. But at that time of the year, they're just not taking chances. And that buck told me that there was no place I could have been. So to go on with this story, so I followed his tracks, then I backtracked and I looped back around to get into my stand. And in that woodlot, there was it was a creek, but it was just barely a creek. It was just like a little drainage, and most of the time it was dry, but if you got a lot of rain, it was a little bit of a creek. And the woods sloped down from both directions to that creek in the middle. And there was a trail, a well-worn deer path on each side of that little creek running parallel with it. And I didn't know near what I do today. And I had a stand set right along that little creek with a trail on each side of me about 20 yards. So I had a trail to the north of me and I had a trail to the south of me. And I was hunting with a north wind, and I thought, well, if that buck comes on the north trail, I'm going to be downwind of him and I'll be great, because I knew there was a buck in there because I just seen his tracks, Well, then I have a trail to the downwind side on the south of me, and I'm sitting there in my stand, and I turned my head to the trail to the south, the downwind trail, and just as I did, this big old 160 class 10 point, I can still see him to this day, he had little acorns on his rack. You know how sometimes they damage a rack and they get them little acorns? He had that on every time. And he walks in, and just as I turned my head and seen him, he hits my scent and he locks up, and he turns and looks at me, and his eyes bugged out big as saucers, and he blew out of there. And what I learned that day made me a much better deer hunter, because what I did from that point on, and I'd hunted that stand a handful of times by this point, and every time a deer came by, I got busted, because every time they came by, they was on the downwind trail. They was never on the upwind trail. And so what I did was I moved that stand, and I put two stands up. I put a stand on the far side of each of the trails, and I killed a good buck there a couple of years later doing that. But that one little hunt taught me so much. First, it taught me how those bucks use the wind when they come in the morning to bed. And a lot of times that's done before it's even daylight. These guys that say, oh, you go out there and you get there, you're standing at 3 a.m. and you sit there in the dark for 2 or 3 hours and you beat them to their bed. Yeah, good luck with that, because that buck is still going to smell you. When the lights are out and it's dark, that doesn't mean he can't smell you. He's not going to just plop in there because it's dark. He's going to scent check that bed before he comes in, whether it's daylight or not. And there's a lot of things that may sound good in theory, like getting to your stand real early. But if that buck comes in and scent checks his bedding area, it doesn't matter. And that's when I stopped hunting October mornings. And there was a period of probably pushing 20 years that I did not hunt hardly any October morning. A couple of days of the month, if I was on vacation from my job, yeah, I might hunt Halloween morning or, the day before. But for the most of October, I never hunted mornings. Now, in recent years, I've backed off that just a little bit. Now I will hunt a cold front during the last 10 days of October. I hunt October morning during the last 10 days of the month only, and only on a cold front. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question.
No, that's great. I mean, it's one of the most debated topics this time of year, and I'm gonna preface this comment with the first thing that stands out to me is this is what we talk about on this podcast of the difference between a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. We're talking about mature bucks, not 3-year-olds. And if we're only hunting mature bucks, this is how one of the ways that they are just so much different. And, you know, I was talking to Joe Bosing. He lives in Indiana, hunts over in Kentucky. He's helping us with Chasing Giants TV. And he actually made an interesting statement that I'd never heard about before, or someone say before. And he said, when I got married and had kids, it made me a better hunter. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? He said, because I couldn't hunt as much. He said, I had to pick and choose my time because I couldn't hunt like I used to, where it was every single night, every single morning. He said, when I had family obligations and I could only hunt certain times, I would only look for the exact time that the conditions were right for where I was going. He said, I became a better hunter just because I couldn't hunt as much. And I started thinking about you and I over the years, you know, your story about how you used to hunt and how I used to just burn it up. And I shot a 10th of the deer, saw a 10th of the deer that I did then when I'm only hunting when the conditions are right now. I haven't been in a stand yet. For those people who want to laugh, Kentucky's been open for now 3 weeks. I have not been in a tree stand yet.
Well, I think the big takeaway here is, you know, we can talk about hunting October mornings or any other tactic. When it comes to mature bucks, here's what the listener needs to really pay attention to. When it comes to mature bucks and someone starts giving you advice, ask them how many 5-year-old bucks they killed following that advice. I want to see how many guys have killed, you know, 3 or 4 even 5-year-old bucks or older on October mornings. And I'm not talking the last few days of October. I'm talking like from the first 3 weeks of October.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it'll never happen, because absolutely there's never and always shouldn't be in our vocabulary as deer hunters. But I'll tell you what, I bet there ain't very many guys out there that have killed, you know, 3 or 4 bucks, 5 and older during the first 3 weeks of October on morning hunts.
Well, and there's another thing that I've gotten to see over the last probably 8-9 years that's a little bit different, and maybe it's just I'm older and I can't do it anymore, but hitting it that hard the whole month of October, it really prohibited me for doing what I needed to do and stay in the woods as many hours as I needed to during the rut. It's almost like your body can only take some, at least, and maybe it's just because I got older, I don't know, but you know, when I used to hit it so hard in October, I was already almost kind of exhausted and burnt out a little bit by the time the peak time came. And, you know, we needed to do all day sits and spend, you know, not just an hour and a half or hour and 45 minutes in the stand before, you know, sunset. It really almost, I don't know, it was almost too much too early. I was so excited to be in the tree stand, I almost burnt myself out and probably burnt my stands out as well.
Yeah, I've been through the same thing in years past. This year, I'm so fired up. I may be more fired up than I've ever been. I'm just going out there, and I don't even care if I kill something. I want to get video footage. And if I can just see a buck and get a little bit of video footage of a buck, that's a great hunt to me. And, you know, it's very rare for me to shoot 2 bucks in a season. It's happened a few times, but not that often. And I just like being out there anymore. And that burnout is a real thing. And I've had it happen, but the older I get, it's kind of the opposite. It's like, man, I just get so fired up. Just to sit out there, I spend all year working on the property and doing these projects. And I just want to watch these deer that I built a home for these deer. I built some of the best habitat I could possibly think of, and to see these deer using it and piling in there and feeding in my food plots and bedding in my switchgrass, and then getting to video it on top of watching it, that's what it's all about for me.
All right. Well, let's get on to our listener submitted questions for the evening. I'm going to put the first one up on the screen and have you read it off.
This one comes from Cody Urban from Holman, Wisconsin. Says, Don, you may have touched on this a little bit in past conversations, but I'm curious if your thoughts have changed or grown since then. If a property such as yours has everything a mature buck could want, including a large variety and amount of food for the entire year, multiple types of bedding cover, plenty of does for the rut, and low human intrusion, why don't you have more of your target bucks calling your property home for their entire life? I only ask this because you have stated that you don't see the bucks until after the fall shift happens. Thanks for your time and good luck to both of you this fall. Well, Cody, it really just plays into the habits of the white-tailed deer as a species. So, in the spring, those bucks get in their bachelor groups. They leave their fall range for the most part. Now, not all of them do, but the majority of them do. And they give the prime habitat typically is left for the does to raise their fawns. That thicker, more typical deer cover, high stem count type of cover. That's where a doe can raise her fawns more successfully because she can hide them better from predators and things like that. It's just Mother Nature's way. And to be honest, it doesn't matter to me if I keep them bucks all summer on my place. Shoot, let them go somewhere else and eat something else besides my food plots. As long as they show up in the fall, that's what I care about. It's just the whitetail's nature. You're not going to hold them on a property. It probably doesn't even matter. I mean, the size of the property within reason doesn't matter either. Unless you own thousands of acres, you might be able to keep them. But to keep them on the size of properties that most of us hunt and own, it's going to be next to impossible. Even during season, it's next to impossible. But to do it year round, it just doesn't fit into the life cycle of the whitetail.
And not to mention, in big ag country, there's all of these crops in, so the deer are dispersed much farther away than, after the crops are picked, there's open ag in miles in each direction, and then they concentrate back into where there's cover again. But I mean, you go out into big ag country, there's deer everywhere out across those fields spread out, and once they're picked, they start concentrating into where there's cover after there's none left from the ag field.
Yep.
All right. Well, before we move on to our second question, we want to talk a little bit about our friends at Midwest Land Group. We mentioned this a couple weeks ago. If you're interested, if you're in the real estate business and you're wanting to, looking for a change, they are aggressively looking for partners to come in and help them in states like Kentucky, Ohio. They want to move a little bit east. So if you're interested in not only a property to acquire, but a career with a group of guys that are just a bit different. And we've known Brian Kraft and his team for a lot of years, think the world of them. Reach out to Midwest Land Group, and we'll be right back with our second question.
Ever had a terrible real estate experience? Average realtors usually spend more time selling themselves than on selling your land. They'll tell you anything to get the listing. They know that if they get the listing, you're stuck with them. Not here. Midwest Land Group has changed the way land is sold and is the only brokerage to offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. That means if we don't meet your expectations, you can fire us. That puts all the pressure on us to perform. We don't just list land, we sell it. If you're looking to buy or sell property, don't before you talk to us. Visit us at MidwestLandGroup.com.
All right, the next one comes from Andy Hendricks from Anderson, South Carolina. It says, Dear Don and Terry, thank you for producing such an interesting and informative podcast. You often refer to the average hunter. Well, my question is about the average podcast host. How much information should we take to heart from the average podcast host? The reason I ask is because you often warn about taking advice from experts who have not achieved the goals you want to achieve, but you rarely mention names. The reason I ask is because there does seem to be a good bit of crossover. For instance, I first heard of Bronson Strickland and Steve Damaris on another podcast. That same one often has Brent Henderson on as well. I've heard Bobby Worthington on a different podcast, so it makes me think that hunting podcast host might be a tight-knit group. But then I just heard another host completely trashing Tony LaPratt. After listening to the great debate, I know you have your differences on some things, but it seemed you agreed on a will and seemed to be very knowledgeable as well. It will help us out a lot if you just go ahead and write that chapter of your book and let us know who we can trust. Thanks, as always. Keep up the good work for the kingdom and the hunting community. Well, Andy, you mentioned some guys that I guess some of them are podcast hosts, but a lot of those guys are just guests on podcasts. I don't think podcast hosts are a tight-knit group by any means whatsoever. In fact, there's probably a little bit of animosity between some of us, if you wanted to know the truth. But as far as which ones you can trust, I think we talked about that earlier. You got to look at what a person has accomplished. I mean, it's easy to repeat stuff. That you've heard, and even good advice. There's a lot of good advice that gets repeated, but the guy repeating it has got about zero experience with it. He's just repeating, but he doesn't even know enough to know if he's repeating good advice or bad advice. He's just repeating what he's heard. So it really boils down to success. And, there's a lot of things I'm not going to talk about because I have not been successful at it. So, you're not going to hear me talk about still hunting for deer because I haven't been a still hunter that had success. Try to think of a few other things. You're not going to hear me talk about decoying deer. I've decoyed bucks and shot them over a decoy, but not big mature bucks, and not enough to make me think I should be sharing advice. And that's what it really boils down to. It doesn't matter if the person is a podcast host or a guest on the podcast. You need to take a good look at what a person has harvested and how he's harvested it, and how it compares to your situation. And, there's guys that have been very successful at different things, but it may not apply to you at all. For example, maybe they're great at rifle hunting out in the plain states of Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, or whatever. Are they going to help you if you're a bow hunter on the East Coast? Probably not. Maybe a little bit, but not too much. So you got to take a look at the person talking and their success and how they achieve that success. And how does that compare to where you live and where you hunt? And, it may sound like I'm coming down on a lot of people, and I don't mean it to sound that way because there is some really great deer hunters out there putting out some first-class knowledge and sharing it, and I'm still learning to this day. I don't know it all by any means. In fact, the older I get, the more I realize how little I do know. So I'm just still trying to learn myself. But the one thing I have picked up over the years is who you're getting your advice from is very critical. And you need to listen to guys that have already done what you're seeking to do.
Yeah, that's where I was going to circle this back around. I think the better way to answer the question is align what you're listening to with people who have achieved the goals you're looking for. You used to have a video on the front of your website when talking about consulting is, you don't go hire a consultant that hasn't done what you're trying to do. You look for the people that align with what your goals are, and that's going to be different with all of us. And, when somebody calls Don Higgins and says, I want a consulting service, you ask them questions. Where are they at? How do they hunt? Because that will clearly say whether myself, Wes, Bobby, who's the right person to align with what they're doing. Are they hunting in a bait state? Are they rifle hunting? Are they hunting in big woods? Do they want to focus more on nutrition than habitat? Do we have to teach them how to hunt? I think you can get good in this is me probably saying something that you don't like, but I think you can get good information from everybody. But I do think that there's some things that people just regurgitate because they think it sounds good. That's not, well, what you said. They haven't proven it yet. So if you want to get into the science of southern deer and how they move around and feed, Bronson Strickland will be your perfect person. But I think there is some things that don't apply in the Midwest that he does with his research. There'd be some things that, Joe Miles can talk about with swamp bucks in South Carolina that you and I wouldn't have a clue on. But I just think you need to align what you're listening to with what your goals are and the style and people that's doing it.
Yep.
Nah, come on. I teed you up there. You're ready to pop.
Yeah. I'll just put it this way. I know a couple of people that I would be very surprised if they put out anything of value. Now, I think most people can provide, some valuable knowledge, but there's a couple of people that, yeah.
Well, and there's most other podcasts. I don't even know, maybe Bronson's, but most podcasts have a different guest every week. So you're getting a difference of perspective when they do that. And then some podcasts are just about rehashing drama and controversy. And then some people are just following one. So there's something out there for everybody, and we're not for everybody. We've learned that really quick. There's a lot of people that don't want anything to do with us, and that's fine. But there's something out there for everybody. It's just pick what aligns with what you want to be.
Yeah, you got to look at your situation and find somebody that's successful under those same conditions, and you're the same region of the country, the same weapon, same type of property. I mean, you can take a bow hunter in the Midwest, but is he hunting public land? Is he hunting small tracts of private ground? Is he hunting a big piece of ground that he owns and manages? So just a bow hunter in the Midwest, there's 3 different options right there. So you got to look at your situation and just find somebody that's been successful under the same, situation that you got. And you brought up consulting, Terry. I want to throw this out. I've already started a list for next winter, and I'm trying to slow down. And I want to throw this out to our listeners. If you want me to consult on your property next winter, I am just about at the limit of what I'm going to take. So don't drag your feet too long.
Hey, let's get the next one up here.
This one comes from Damon Marling from Parish Crossing, Indiana. Says, "Hey, Don and Terry, I'm still looking forward to your podcast every week. Thanks for your faithfulness to God and our country. This is a giant question. I think in the hunting world, everyone says the giants are in certain areas. I think you and others have said it's the genetics in that area. It's also said that doe run off their young buck offspring. If you think about it, how can there ever be genes of giants locked in certain areas? For the most part, wouldn't they be forced to disperse 2 to 20 miles every year when their moms drive them away, outside of what you said to shoot the moms of the button bucks? Or would you be more apt to think that there is a sanctuary in these big buck areas to allow them to grow to an older age class? If you still think it's the genes in an area, you can explain how they stay there. Can you explain how they stay there?" Well, I think it's both. I think it's the genes, but it's also the sanctuary gives them age. You got to have that age to go along with the good genes. The buck that I'm hunting this year is Zacchaeus. I talked about the video that was just released and how he changed to last from a 3-year-old to a 4-year-old to a 5-year-old. Quite frankly, a lot of hunters would have shot him as a 3-year-old, and most would have definitely shot him as a 4-year-old. So the age comes into it, but the genes also play into it. So what keeps those genes from dispersing out of an area? Well, there's always going to be does die and get killed in an area. Hunting alone is going to take out a bunch of does every year, so their male offspring should stick around, or the odds are great that they will stick around in that area they was born in. The other thing is you got to remember the genes don't come just from the buck. the genes come from the does. And so you get some does in an area that have good genes, and then their doe fawns are their daughters are going to carry those good genes. And, a certain amount of those are going to get killed off where the males stick around as well. I can't explain it any better than that. I know that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I think it's the combination of the sanctuary that allows bucks to get older, but there's also the gene factor. There absolutely has to be.
You can have an area that has great genes in it and have a bunch of 155-inch 3-year-olds that all get shot, and you never see the production of good genes.
Yep. So, I hope that answered your question, Damon.
He will get a free T-shirt, so hope he enjoys it.
I bet he's already got a bunch of them. This one comes from Anonymous. Says, hello, Don and Terry. Don, this question is for you. Several weeks ago, you talked about what you would do if you oversaw the Illinois DNR. My question is, what would you do about baiting supplemental feeding in Ohio if you oversaw the ODNR? I recently listened to a podcast of a couple guys who are actively trying to make it illegal to bait in Ohio, which I am in favor of, but they want to go to as far as to outlaw any supplemental feeding as well as mineral sites. They said as a last resort, they will push the CWD button. How can I convince them that fighting CWD while outlawing mineral is an oxymoron? They are serious and have already hired a lobbyist and have a lot of support from the hunting community, so I would not be surprised if they would get it through. P.S. For anyone interested in learning more about this, check out their website, huntersadvocateofohio.com. Well, I did check out that website, and there's, not living in Ohio, this is really not my battle, but I'll share my opinion. I'm not going to get into the fight. I'm not going to be writing legislators or the DNR trying to influence them one way or the other, but I will give my opinion. I think that the state of Ohio, if they would outlaw baiting during season, the state would be the number one state. And within about 3 or 4 years, it'd be the number one state for giant bucks. There's just way too many young bucks getting shot on those bait piles. The thing about supplemental feeding, though, you got to remember is that baiting, a larger percentage of the hunting population is going to be out baiting than will be out supplemental feeding outside of season. Very few deer hunters are serious enough that they're going to put their money and time into supplemental feeding outside of season. So that's going to be minimal, in my opinion. I think these guys are a little bit misguided. I think it's almost, I compare it to these guys that are the all-native habitat guys. You see they've got pages on social media and different groups, all-native habitat managers or whatever. And, those guys don't, most of the people that follow those groups and support those groups have no idea what they're doing or what they're supporting, because, we produced a video, I don't know, a couple of years ago that I wish everybody could see it. It's about the all-native fallacy, I think is the name of it. And all these plants that are not native to this country that we grow, apple trees, pear trees, corn, soybeans, alfalfa, clovers. How are you going to be a good deer manager and not have soybeans, corn, clover? You go right down the list, turnips, radish, all the way down the list. The only food plot seed that we could find that was native to the United States is sunflowers. That was it. Everything else, corn is from Mexico, and apple trees are from, I don't know, one of them Stan countries, Kazakhstan or something like that. These plants are from all over the world, and yet we use them in agriculture and in land management for wildlife. To think that you can have a good deer property with none of these others, I guess you probably could have a decent, but it won't be near as good as it could be with some of these others. You got these people that want to, they want to be all natural, and they just don't understand what that really means. So to come back to your question, these guys that want to totally outlaw supplemental feeding, thinking that they're doing a good thing, and they throw the CWD card out there. Well, there is a growing sentiment among experts, and I do not consider myself an expert, but among people with PhDs, that nutrition could definitely play a role in the management of CWD and then the control of the spread of CWD, and also genetics, genes. So these guys that think that they're do-gooders, that think that they're doing good, but they're too narrow-minded to see that they probably do as much harm with their ideas as they do good. So my opinion on Ohio, if I lived there, I would like to see them outlaw the bait piles, but I would like to also see them allow supplemental feeding outside of season.
Yep. All right, we're going to get to this last one, make sure we get through all of them.
This one comes from Ben Lawrence from Muskego, Wisconsin. Says, "Hi, Don and Terry. I was fortunate enough to tag out on my target buck and biggest to date in September. I hunt a 30-acre property, and I have a lot more habitat improvement on my to-do list. Aside from maybe taking a doe, I don't even plan to hunt until the gun season, which opens mid-November. Would you take advantage of this time to do some minimally invasive improvements, or would you just completely leave it alone? My buck-to-doe ratio is phenomenal, so I do not have to do any doe management. I currently have no other target bucks on camera, but November always brings some good ones. A side note, thank you. This podcast has been the reason for my success. I hunted a win that I normally wouldn't have, but it was one pie slice perfect where I anticipated he was betting. It worked perfect." Yeah, and there's a picture of Finn and his buck. At this point, I would probably stay out. I think you got a lot to lose. You say you got a lot of good bucks that move in November. You can burn out a property before those bucks arrive. You can put the does on high alert, even drive them from the property. You only got a 30-acre property, so you can't have that many projects that you couldn't complete after season. I don't think. So I would just wait till season's over if it was me. But the thing about it is you don't want to drag these things on forever either. I mean, a 30-acre property, you should be able to get in there in like one off season and do just about everything you need to do, and then get out and stay out. I think that's a big mistake that a lot of land managers make, is they are always on their property, always doing something. And I would much rather see them just get in, go at it hard, get it all done, get out and stay out.
But at this point in the year, there's no big gains for anything you're going to do this time of year. It's only going to be a negative impact for that November hunt, unless you're willing to not hunt it at all this fall. So, like you said, stay out, wait till after seasons, rest up, stock up on your little Debbies, and be ready for all-day sits in November.
That's exactly what I would do.
All right, so we're going to be hunting and seeing each other a little bit this weekend. This episode will air on, I believe, the 4th or 5th of October. No, it'll be 5th, 6th. So, we're in that period where evening hunts, you're going to be pretty much in the stand every night, following, and it's all going to come down to weather for the next couple weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, I've noticed in these deer, there's two. They're still feeding on the greens quite a bit, but they're also hitting the acorns. And one thing I noticed was I got that white oak tree in my front yard I've talked about a few times. The acorns are all gone off that tree, and they have been for over a week now. There's not an acorn left on the tree. They're all on the ground, and they've pretty much all been consumed by the deer. And I don't know if it's the same way in the deer woods or not. Now, yesterday I was hunting near two giant bur oak trees when I had that button buck feeding on those acorns under those bur oaks. They were still dropping as I was hunting, those acorns falling. So the deer on those acorns, but they're also still hitting the greens hard. And especially I think on these warmer days. Temperature today was probably pushing 80 degrees. They're going to hit those greens hard. The 7 does and the buck I seen this evening on the hunt, they came out and fed on the real world soybeans. As the soybeans are turning yellow, but there's still some green leaves among the yellow ones, and they fed those soybeans for a good little bit. So, just a little tip if you're going to hunt this week, you got those food sources, be on them.
All right, and if you didn't see Don's video that aired on Friday about the buck called Zacchaeus and the history, make sure you go back and watch that. I'll try to put a link in the description to go back and watch that. It's going to help you tie a lot of what Don's kind of putting out there earlier than what he normally would. If it wasn't for this TV show, we're trying to do something with this TV show, and that is be very dynamic with the stuff that we're posting. It's only going to have a 2-3 day lag on it. So it's not like we're accumulating all this footage and waiting till next year to air it. So a little bit different approach. We hope you all enjoy it. Go out, please subscribe and like all of the Chasing Giants TV channels. There's Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. It helps us out. We're trying to produce this content, but we can't do it without your all support. But yeah, I'm excited about this week, and we'll see where it goes. And say, keep your fingers crossed and say a little prayer for us. All those people out in the, down in the Southeast that are affected by this flood. It's, I can complain all I want to about EHD being on one of my farms, but there's a lot of people hurting a whole lot worse. So keep them in your prayers.
God bless everyone. See you here next week.
Sub 4 pounds, 8 feet per second faster. Our goal wasn't just light and fast. It was how light and how fast.
Yeah, buddy.
Hey, good morning from Wise Eye's office here in southern Louisiana. It's going to be a warm 94 degrees today. We're not going to the woods. It's too hot. So I want to talk to you today, in a very short time here, about faith and what it means to believers. Peter, who was a great character in the Bible, I love his attitude. I love his gumption. But sometimes Peter gives us the best lessons on how we deal with things. In Matthew 14, he witnessed probably the greatest sermon ever spoke. He listened to God himself tell us how to live with each other in the Sermon on the Mount. Then somebody said, hey, we need to feed these people. And there was no food. And Peter and the disciples going, well, what are we supposed to send them away? Lord, send them away. Let them go find food in the city. And we were just, Jesus said, no, what do we got? And Peter and the disciples rounded up this little boy that had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And Jesus basically told them, that's enough. And I can see their facial expressions. Lord, this is not enough. But Jesus blessing it, he fed, it says in the Bible, 5,000 men, which probably, when you figure out the women and the children, was close to 15,000 people. And he did that with 5 loaves and 2 fish. So Peter witnessed this, and just, I can imagine the thoughts that went through their brains about how great this God is that this guy, they're following Jesus and what he's going to do. After the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus needed to have some time with God. So he sent those 12 off in a boat and said, y'all go out in the Sea of Galilee out there, and I'll catch up with you later. Jesus does go off, and he does what we need to do. He needs to be still with God. And he just needs to focus on what God needs for him to do. Peter and the guys are out in the boat. It says about 3 in the morning, and you're talking about now, Jesus has been praying with his Father for 6-8 hours, being alone with God. And the wind was blowing quite well, so the boat was rocking quite a bit. They were scared. And they just witnessed a great miracle, but their faith had turned to fear. Now, fear had gripped them to where they just didn't, they thought they were going to die. But then Peter saw Jesus walking to them on the water. And as he approached the boat, Peter yelled out to him, "If that you, Jesus, let me come to you and walk on the water." So Jesus in his wisdom said, "Come on, Peter, if that's what it takes, come on." So Peter steps out the boat and steps on the water. Now, I don't know this biblically, but I can imagine Peter probably said, "This is probably cool somewhere," and they just didn't write it down. But, as he put, like he's standing on Jello. I mean, it's got to be great. And he starts to walk toward Jesus. And the circumstances of life, the wind, the waves, started to batter him, and he lost sight of Christ, and he started to focus on his circumstances, and he began to sink. Now, Christ has got a sense of humor. He didn't let him sink like we would do it. I actually looked it up. It probably takes less than a second from the time you put your foot on the water. If you stepped off a pier, it would take less than a second to sink under the water. But I imagine Christ just let him sink real slow. And as the water got to his knees, and as it got to his waist, and as he slowly sunk down, Jesus looks at him, and Peter says the 3 words that will always, always catch Jesus' attention. Right before he goes under, he says, "Lord, save me." Wow, what a powerful statement. And instantly, Jesus reaches down and pulls him out of the water and tells him, "Peter, where's your faith? Your fear has taken over and your faith disappeared." Wow. You're standing there in the face of Jesus himself and don't have enough faith. Now, we laugh at poor old Peter because he got out of the boat and he sank. But think about it. There were 11 other people in that boat that was too scared to step out of that boat. So the lesson here is don't mistake the fear and failure for your own problems, for the weight of our problems. We are taught to live by faith, not by fear. Fear is a liar, guys. He tells you can't do something, but faith says you can. Fear says you can't teach in Sunday school because you're not good enough, but faith says, yes, you can. Fear says you cannot continue on in this job because it's not good, but faith says, yes, you can. Look at our brothers and sisters over in Florida and Georgia right now. Gosh, what fear do they have to where we now, as a faith-based organization, we have to step in and say, yes, your faith can, and we have to meet them at their needs. Looking forward to traveling to some of the places here shortly and meeting some needs, because fear is in play, but faith needs to rise above that. I just thank you for listening to us, and understand that sometimes we can't see where faith wins. But faith always will win. Just a mustard seed. Think about this. A mustard seed of faith can move a mountain. That's all I need. I just want to be there and go and start increasing. Peter, think about it for a second. His faith was so small, but he walked on the water. Just think what happens if our faith is large. There's nothing that can stop you today if you have faith in God. Let me close with a prayer today for us, please, and we will have a good day. So let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for this day. We thank you for the examples that you have kept for us in your word about faith, and faith of the great prophets of Samson and Moses and Noah, Peter, that they showed their faith in you, and you were able to rise them above their circumstances. Gosh, won't we need that? We need faith to rise above our circumstances today. You are the only one that can deliver us, Father. There's no other way. There's no other way that we could survive or pin our hopes on anyone else but you. I thank you for all these fellows and ladies who watch this program, Father. I'm just a small guy, Father. I just pray that you will use what little knowledge I have in faith to encourage some other people today. And I just thank you for your son and what he did. He hung there between heaven and earth, and he said, "It is finished." And I thank you for that he humbled himself and took my sin upon himself. Thank you, God, for what you do, because we can never repay you. For we ask this in Christ's name, amen. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. Till next time, I think I have it right before Christmas, so I'm gonna have to start looking on some Christmas stuff. So thank you again for the opportunity. Look forward to hearing from you. Strengthen your faith, fellas. Fear's not gonna win. He's a liar. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.